I still do a lot of marking on the page for places that are quite specific. So when you mention like the semicolon, like I want to put a spot. So I often highlight, like I have kind of like 3 colors that I use to highlight 3 kind of categories of errors.
Okay.
And then I would say the audio feedback tends to be a bit more generalized feedback. So a bit more of what we call the higher order concerns.
Yeah.
So things that are more like throughout the whole document, or, you know, kind of where things went wrong in a more general sense. And then the tone that you mentioned, that's a really big part of the audio feedback, because there can often be these sorts of like, you know, when we make sort of the margin comments, they can be things that students can interpret more negatively, or, you know, it's like awkward or vague or something where it's like, oh, like, did they even understand what I meant? But when we go through it with the audio feedback, it's a chance to be, you know, a supportive tone, let them know what they did well, but also where they have to go next. And I do think I think if you are giving good, you know, this kind of like paragraphs of feedback at the end that sort of address things generally, it does a similar kind of thing. But this saves me from like bad handwriting or like lots of typing that would do that. And now that I'm practiced at it, to me, it's like fairly easy to do this in audio. Like I usually am making notes and have like 2 or 3 things besides the students' questions to work with that I'm keeping in mind. And I kind of order them as what I think is like most important or maybe most positive off the top, and then kind of work through them that way. But I definitely think of the audio as like higher order and more general, and a bit more of like this student where they're at right now and where they need to go next. So sort of like more specific to the student. Whereas I think when I'm marking up their paper, it's a bit more like here, here, and here. And, you know, I'll say more about, or I'll kind of mark things, but knowing that I'm going to go back and say more about that in the audio. I think it cuts down a lot on meetings. Like I don't actually have many like office hour meetings. And sometimes they might see, like when I used to mark on paper and hand things back on paper, they would sometimes come to talk to me right away about their mark, but it was always like, listen to the audio feedback first, and then we can chat if you still have concerns. But usually that was plenty. Whereas before, or in classes where there isn't audio feedback, I have had more student meetings about it. But they do, like on the course evaluations, they often comment on how helpful that is, as if it's my idea, when really it's like a hallmark of the Writing Centre. But it does lend itself to very positive feedback. And I think maybe especially so during the pandemic, when people are, you know, really, you know, that kind of one-on-one attention is really powerful, I think.